All right, hello. So in this video, what I'm going to do is talk about setting up a moving camera for our 2D game. But we're also going to talk about how to confine that camera so that it doesn't show things outside the edges. So let's first set up a camera. And we've done this before. So if you haven't already, you'll want to bring in Send Machine into your project. So we'll go um, Window, once you're in Unity, Window, Package Manager. And then once the Package Manager comes up, we're going to switch from In Projects to Unity Registry. There we go. Then we'll go down and find Send Machine and see if we need to install it. So we'll install it. And then it'll be installed into your project. Give that a second to finish. There we go. So I can close Package Manager. That doesn't immediately bring in the virtual camera into our system, but you'll notice it added a additional menu item up at the top. So I'm going to go down here and Send Machine, and I'm going to choose Create a 2D Camera. And so what that did is it created a number of things. One, it created the virtual camera. You'll notice that the camera moved over here. And that camera was tied to the main camera. So you'll see down here in the inspector for the main camera, you see the Send Machine brain has been connected. All right, so a couple things I want to do with the camera is, in this game, I want the camera to follow my main character. So if you select the Send Machine virtual camera, you'll notice there's an option to follow. So I'm going to give it the player as the thing to follow. And so you'll now notice that it has moved the camera so that it is, centered on my main player here. Okay. So you'll notice that you can kind of already see it down here in the game part, or if you look at where the camera is showing, is it showing off the edge of my screen and off the bottom of my screen. And if I was to run this, you will notice that when I fall, it follows me down into the fall check, which really I just want the camera to kind of stop and not show that part of the game. That's part of the secret of the game we want to keep secret. So as you might imagine, we're going to want to sort of play around with this a little bit. So I have the Send Machine selected over here, and then you look at the inspector stuff. You'll see that I have the ability to change the lens, transitions. We're not going to mess with that right now. The body. Now the body we can do all kinds of interesting things with. So for example, you can change all of these values and it'll change how the camera moves, how it pans, how quickly it follows the individual, and so on. And you'll notice that right now it's tracking my object directly, but we can adjust that. So I'll go track to object offset. Maybe if I put a 5, you'll notice what this does is it moves the camera sort of 5 units in front of the character, which kind of makes sense for a left to right side scroller that maybe you want to be able to look a little more, see a little more of the space in front of you. Now, if you're doing a side scroller that's more where you're exploring the world, then you may want to keep the camera centered on your player. It's up to you. And then there's all kinds of other choices you can play with, like what's called the dead zone. Essentially, that's what does the camera move if something moves within that range. So you can adjust like the dead zone. You can actually see in these little values here that it's showing you. By the way, these are guidelines. And if you don't have guidelines, it's this little checkbox up here at Game Window Guides. You can see them or not see in part of the game window. It's useful for when you're setting up the camera, and then once you've got it set up, you probably want to get rid of that for now. All right, so you've seen the issues so far with the camera. This is where I have it looking slightly forward of me, and this will work nicely. So let me go up here. I've set up these little series of jumping, so I keep jumping. So you'll notice up here, I'm starting to see outside of my background. even further outside my background. And when I fall, you'll notice I see the piece there. And I can jump off the side here, which is a problem. So I really want to do what's called confining the camera. You can do some tricks. So you can like extend this all upwards as much as you want. One way to do that is just change the camera background so it matches whatever color blue this is. You'll notice at the very top of my image I have a blue that's consistent. So you could just make the whole background that color. That fixes stuff going up, but it doesn't fix left and right and down. So what I really want to do is sort of confine the camera so that it stays within the scene. And you may want to make the scene bigger, but I'm just going to show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is essentially build a bounding box that the camera is not allowed to leave. So we're going to define essentially our scene here as the bounding box, and we're going to say, okay, camera, stay inside of that. Now, this takes a little more work than me just saying that, but we'll go through it. So first of all, over here in the hierarchy, we're going to create a new empty object. So there it is. And I'll call this camera bounds. So these are the bounds of the camera. So right now, all this has is a transform, and I'm going to make sure that I go ahead and reset it so that it's sort of centered at 0, 0, 0 in this case. And I don't have crazy Z values. Okay. So with the camera bounds empty game object, I'm going to add a component. And the component I'm going to add is this thing called a composite collider 2D. And the composite collider is so that when we add a collider, we're able to sort of bring things together, composite them, and so it'll work with the camera system. So let's choose a composite collider 2D. And you'll notice that when I created this thing, I, for free, got a rigid body 2D as well. Because we do need to be able to apply physics on this, and it's working within a physics system, even though it's not necessarily going to move, but we still need that. So one of the things we're going to do is in our composite collider 2D component, where it says outlines, we're going to change that to polygons. So we want polygons as the geometry type. Okay, and the rigid body, right now it's dynamic, which means it can move, but we don't want it to move, so we're going to change that to static. So we have polygons geometry type for our composite collider and static for our rigid body. Okay. Now we're going to add an additional collider, and since this is sort of a rectangular shape here, we're going to add a box collider 2D to this. There's our box collider 2D that we just added, and it's all good. So the box collider is the thing that we're going to then resize. So it's the little green, it's really hard to see, the little green in there. So I'm going to click on the edit collider, and I'm going to pull this thing essentially to the edges in all different directions. It's going to take a little bit of zooming in and zooming out. So let me go over here and zoom in. So I'm going to pull this thing. Essentially, I'm defining where the camera is okay. So right to that edge. Pull this thing to the top. Right to the edge. Pull this thing to the bottom. Right to the edge. And then let's pan over and see if we got this left side. Looks like we're okay on this left side. It's really hard to see, but essentially I'm building a box that's within my image, my picture, my screen. And I'm going to use that to sort of set that. All right. The other thing I'm going to do once I've sort of defined, edited, I'm going to unedit it. It's set now. I'm going to do a little checkbox right here where it says use by composite, because I have this composite collider, so I want these two colliders to work together. So this box collider is being used by this composite collider as sort of the area. And the composite collider is going to be used by the camera here in a minute. It's not hooked up yet, but we'll get there. All right, so hopefully my rigid body's good, composite collider's good, and my box collider's good. All right, so hopefully my camera bounds are set up. So the next thing that I need to do is attach this to the camera. So I'm going to select my Cinemachine virtual camera, and I'm going to add a component. No, I'm going to add an extension. So so you'll see here extension select. And if you pull down, you'll see there's all kinds of extensions you can add. And what I want to add is a Cinemachine confiner. So this confiner, as you might guess, is to confine the camera so that it can't escape some type of bounds. So there's my confiner. It's a little script, and it says it needs a bounding shape. So right now, it's in confine mode 2D, which is fine, but there's that bounding shape and there has none. And as you might guess, that's the camera bounds that we just created. So I'm going to drag that over here and drop it into my bound shape. And then I'm going to leave confined screen edges there, and you can play with dampening if you like, but we should be good to go. Okay. So let's see what happens. It's actually fairly interesting, I think. So let's hit run here. Okay. You will notice that my character is now doing weird things, right? Notice that the camera is now fully inside of the area of this bounding box that I defined. But my character is being shoved outside of the bounding box. And hopefully you're saying, well, the bounding box has physics on it. My character has physics on it. So when I start the program, the character and the bounding box have to separate from each other. And since the box is static, that means my character, which has to move, is getting shoved, even though it's through the other things that it has physics on. It's getting shoved outside of the bounding box. So this is an issue. So what we need to do is we need to allow the camera bounds box to not affect the player physics. So right now they're sharing with each other. And the reason for that is if you look at the camera bounds, you'll notice that it's on layer default. And if you look at the player is also on layer player, but they're actually still interacting with each other even though they're on different players. And let's take a look. So if you go to Edit, Project Settings, pull this up, the project settings. This is where we looked at the input earlier. And then you look at Physics 2D. What you'll notice, there's this little setup. Notice these are all the layers. So if you look at all the layers, they're all there. Let me pull my physics back up. And essentially this is saying which layers interact with each other physics-wise. And so notice all layers still interact with each other because they're all been checked. So I'm going to create a new layer for my camera bounds. So there, layer, let me add one. And I'm going to call it maybe bounds or camera bounds. We'll call it bounds. Okay. Then I'm going to choose my camera bounds again, and I'm going to set it to layer bound. So now my player is on layer player, and this camera bounds thing is on layer bounds. But as you might guess, they're still interacting with each other. So for my bounds, I do not want it to interact with the player. So I'm going to uncheck player from bounds. Okay, so right now those two physics layers should hopefully no longer interact with each other. Let's see if that fixes our problem. There we go. So let's see if my camera does the right thing. So it moves with my character. Oops. When I fail, notice down below here in the game, the camera does not fall with it. which is good. All right, let's go up, up, up. And you'll notice that my character is getting towards the top and kind of jumping off the screen because the camera is not following. There we go. All right, so that's how you do camera and bounding it to your scene only. All right, I'll see you in the next one.